Okay, welcome back. So this is Cosmogonies by Berosus and by Lenormand in their own words. This will be again about our cosmogony and the origins of humanity in reference to whether or not the biblical history of Genesis is correct, where it came from, and also it's in reference to the Chaldeans, and you'll see about it, he'll get into that, but also about the northern peoples that originally gave civilization to humanity and to Egypt and to many of the Akkadian and Assyrio-Babylonian societies, as well as also the Vedics in India and the other cosmogonies that we know as the major flat earth cosmogonies. And so this is about the descriptions of those peoples and some of the oldest descriptions that we have of recorded writings on earth. So here we go, we're going to get into it here. So again, we have to remember the extremely old text that has been translated, then retranslated. So it's translated from ancient Akkadian and Babylonian cylinder seals and translated into German or into Latin and then back into French for Lenormand himself. Forgive me if as I piece it together, it might be a bit choppy, and I'll try and get the whole thing put together into one sensible piece. But from what I've read from it already, it doesn't take too much to see what they're saying and the import of what they're saying there. So I've already gone through the first 50 pages, and what they're talking about is different created words that are important to the biblical texts. One here being fish and the yal syllable, because fish thought yal was finish. Similarly, the ideogram, which means good, is the phonetic sign of the yi syllable because the word for good was Akkadian yigu. These examples sufficient. We could multiply indefinitely, taking up but one by one the signs of the cuneiform syllabary. We would find that all simple syllable values are related to reading the same signs as ideograms taken in the Akkadian language. When word of this reading was a monosyllable, it was taken simply as a phonetic value. When it consisted of several syllabary labes, the phonetic value is that of the first, according acrologically to the method implemented in the passage of the early records of the ideogram and the phonetic. This is from Voyages of Introducing Our Memory on the Spread of the Phoenician Alphabet. The syllables of compound values have the same origin. A sign represents a syllable and the idea of sun, the Akkadian word for sun being tur, or tur. Another, the Gaian syllable, the idea of saying the Akkadian mistletoe or gula for great. A third has the meaning of country and painted the syllable composed mat, according to the Akkadian word mata, country. So that's an interesting portion because Matarik is a word that Zen has been looking into, and mata is apparently the Akkadian word for country. So he's going to explain here that Akkadian is the same thing as Chaldean, is the same thing as Babylonian. and you'll see shortly why. But the Turanian of La Chaldee, or the Turanian of the Chaldeans, they invented this system of writing on the banks of the Tigris, at the bottom of the Euphrates, or they brought it from another region. Where would it have been made before the final migration? It is conceivable that this is a question that would be foolhardy in trying to answer in the present state of science. However, when studies die, the constituent signs of cuneiform writing, in essay form, go back to the images of the physical objects that the signs originally represented. Naturally, these objects seem to lead, as the origin of writing, to another region of the Chaldeans at a septentrional region, whose flora and fauna were notably different, where, for example, neither the lion nor any major feline species of carnivores were known, and where the palm tree did not exist. Oppert in the Proceedings of the French Society of Numismatics and Archaeology, several expressions of the cuneiform text seem to show that the invention of writing is related to the people of the Akkadies, of which therefore there would have been an element in the Turanian population while in Sumeri. Which is the Kushite element. This is confirmed by the fragment of a precious tablet as yet unpublished, which M. de Solcy has given the Louvre, with a translation in Assyrian, and added a clause at the end that said that the text is extract of tables. The Akkadian, his Dipi Akkad. The Assyrian inscriptions show other Akkadi whose name is written identically the same way, living the VHP and VIP century BCist part of Armenia. It was obviously a branch of the same race, who remained north on the way anciently par ran through migration, and which must get our expensive research where Turanian came out lower than the Tigris and the Euphrates. The presence of these Akkadi Armenia is all the more valuable. It is consistent with the testimonies of the Greek writers on the existence of a population of XA or Za-Sibi in the same region. And that's from, and he quotes from Xenophanes, Anabas, Pliny, Pliny's Natural History, Strabo, Stevens, and the Byzantiums. He's talking about a translation in Assyrian, which added a clause at the end that said that the text is an extract from tables in the Akkad, or the Akkadian, and which he called the Dipi Akkad. The Assyrian inscriptions show other Akkadi whose names are written identically the same way, living in the same century in a part of Armenia. And it was obviously a branch of the same race who remained north on the ancient migration routes. History of Semitic Languages, page 60. We shall see from fragments 15 and 10 that Chaldean-Babylonian starts to point to humanity in the post-Diluvian mountains or Disans. It was a memory of the country where they were staying at a time which was enormously remote. Indeed, it seems impossible today to not consider the name of the Chaldeans in Babylon and the surrounding area as synonymous with that of Akkadi or Acadia. This name is no stranger to the cuneiform texts, where we find in both forms, which are exchanged with each other, and Kaldi-Kazdi. It is true that it shows that from the 10th century, designating the population dominant through the lower basin of the Euphrates and Tigris, but Berosus, in this most famous and most important historical fragment, instead of even the origin of the Chaldeans, the monarchy of Babylon, and his testimony is confirmed by the Bible, which from the time of Abraham called the great city of Ur, today Mugur, then Ur of the Chaldeans. An older tradition still refers to the Semitic tribe which had come out of the Hebrews by the name of Il-Disin, the bordering Chaldean. Genesis. Hence it be concluded that the Kaidi and Akkadi were two names exactly synonymous from the most ancient times, and preferably attached to only the use of one or the other, which varied according to a time period, or that were the Chaldi-Akkadi tribe at some point, which became permanently separated from a certain date. In addition to its general meaning of the people, the name of the Chaldeans in classical and biblical antiquity is significantly smaller or more special when it means the priestly caste and the scholarly hereditary. But the members of this caste, which, says Diodorus, the oldest of the Babylonians, are revealed to us in the original monuments of Babylonia, such that we can study today them as of being of Turanian origin, as descendants of the primitive people of Akkadi. The Akkadian language, and their own language, the language which, according to the book of Daniel, was the privilege of the priestly caste, a kind of assigned book given in a palace school, taught at palatial schools. The constitutive laws of society, which were Babylonian, which they were the interpreters which drafted in this idiom, and the magic formulas by which they pretended to exercise supernatural power. Our ancient history from the Oriental Manual, and the assimilation of the Chaldeans and Akkadians, their original relationship with the peoples of the same name in the mountains of Armenia, and from these same mountains are still attested by the same name Akkadi, which in the language specific to this population appears to have meant mountaineers. But here arises some difficulty. We do, and Autoturanians down the mountains of Armendes or Armadenes, and yet we find no trace of their passage in northern Mesopotamia and Assyria. However, they would have crossed it if they had come directly from Armenia to Chaldea along the Tigris Valley. Moreover, if such had been their route, they had pushed south or descendants of the Simkri, the first Cushitic population, and instead we find established further south than these. Their geographic position suggests that they entered into the Chaldeans by the southeast, pushing the northern Sumerians and separating the shores of the Persian Gulf, their former cradle. But as far as we can discern the characters, the native idiom of Susa, which we have some inscriptions from, there was between this language and Akkadian a fairly close relationship, which might imply a relatedness between the population. This agrees with the indications and these statements so ingeniously of Mr. Said, the Zeitschrift Egyptische Sprache, 1870, page 150, to show that Akkadi go down to the Chaldean mountains of Susa, where several other invasions still, again, cut down on the same in the country during the ancient times. We are thus led to assume that Akkadi, or Chaldani, or the Turanian race, left behind them a branch of their nation in the mountains of the Armenians, or the Armadenes, and walked towards the south along the mountains and the left bank of the Tigris into the Susa, where they sojourned some time before invading the plains around and by the Tigris and the Euphrates. In Iluix they were preceded, Arles Sumeri, as to race Hamitic, as in Ham, a way without doubt the symbolic and phonetic spelling which preserved, until the end of the writings of the Chaldeo-Assyrian, which used to represent the name of the Susa, and writes that name Lama, even in the Bible, as if we wanted to characterize this region as a country of antiquity. It is the primitive country par excellence. If these assumptions were able to be demonstrated, the Turanian Chaldea would have mansions in the time of their last migration, their descent of Susania, heights of the plain of the two rivers, Acadi, true or mountain, legitimately deserving that name. It was, however, their true name and national origin, or was it not rather an epithet they gave from the population they had found previously occupying the plains? While she had qualified for Razdi, or that is to say of a conqueror, the root, their appointment ideographic, if we take the items from their value phonetically, provides the Berber reading. It is certain that from the 10th century it is the most read of the Akkadian, but it may have been originally an allophone that expresses an ancient national obsolete. This is the opinion of Sir Henry Rawlinson, that we are not far from sharing. But when it becomes very tempting to bring the name of a barbarian, the Aryans gave to the people that were foreign to them. We know, says Pictet, Indo-European origins. The word papaya or papaia, faith, was transmitted to us by the Greeks, and already appears in Homer, but it is also found among the Indians, with the same meanings in the forms of Barbara, Barvura, Varbara, and Varvara. We cannot accept that there has been transmission from one people to another, and that's from the word barbarian, Barbara. The term, it is colloquially not only found in the Euro-Chaldean and the Rikprati Kakaya, or treated in pronunciation and recitation annexed to the Rig Veda, which dates from a time even older. It must therefore trace the source from an Aryan town. Mr. Bickney and Gneiber, in an Indian article, accepted the conjecture that Barbara was originally the name of a foreign population which was special, with which the Aryans were in contact, and bringing the word of Havar, root, be a curve, it assumes that it was a people with woolly hair and frizzy like Negroes, with dendema. But I, Lassen, easily have refuted this conjecture. They prefer, with most philologists, to see in Barbara an onomatopoeia designating a people whose language is incomprehensible. Seeing the Akkadians of Armenia and Chaldea qualify themselves as Berber, the original name, it might be possible to return the yardstick of similar opinion to Mr. Benfrey. Barbara considered as having been originally the name of a particular people or a race, but the national name of Turanian that primitive Aryans found along the southwest border. The 1 OT manuscripts are Akchapov, and the fault was already introduced in Eusebius before the Armenian translation, which made this expression contradict history in the general sense of the text. The correction was proposed for the first time in the edition of the Thesaurus of Henry Estienne, published at Mota. It well controlled the whole passage, and it is surprising that it was not done. Pictet recognized that foreigners with whom the Aryans had to be found the longest contact in their origin belonged to the Turanian race. The usual designation of ideographic Eumeri in cuneiform texts is no less curious than that of the Akkadi. It means the tribe of the rainbow, or perhaps also to be taken to have been originally an allophone of the tribe of Kisti. We therefore believe compared with the original Cushite, we recognize this part of the population of the Chaldeans. Therefore, the Lasusian or Lasusan were a population of the breed of the Cush had as the Chaldeans before the Turanian, and where the cycle of the Ethiopic fables extend, and is called often Kiosa Yopa and Kioi or Kiadi inhabitants. Along with the name of it is found in yet another form in the name of a special place north of that country, the Kokoi. And he again quotes again from Ptolemy, an Aryan book of expedition, Alexandrinus, Strabo, Diodorus, Polybus, Plutarch, Pliny. Note in passing that, unlike popular belief, Noble in the Volkertafel der Genesis, this name is unrelated to the Arabic appellation Zuz. Philology objects absolutely. An Arabic appellation is simply a perfectly regular Niptian and Persian name Susiana. Uvatsa, the land of Autochthonus, or the land of Autochthonus, which seems an Iranian translation of the name of the Assyrian Lama, with the sense that it gives in its symbolic and phonetic spelling. Anyway, the rest of our latest observations, the variety of languages, from diversity in the origins of the populations, was preserved even under the last Chaldean Empire. In the interior of Babylon, even different spoken languages, often which were not included from one neighborhood to the other. And as Aeschylus, he called the inhabitants of Tragi to this city a crowd mingled, all the jinn, and all the edicts of kings of Babylon reported in the book of Daniel begin with these words: To you it is, people, tribes, languages. Berosus, author of the Antiquities of the Chaldeans, who flourished at the time of Alexander of Macedonia, as he says himself, Babylon has found many documents that are preserved with great care, and who embraced approximately 150,000 years, something moreover composed from stories full of national vanity of heaven, earth, and sea, the antiquity of kings and their actions, on the situation of the Babylonians and its fertility in animals for the figures, outside of nature of the sea of the Eritrea, and other fables like that. (11) This character is called Iliac in Recitid Ilietus Deus in Fiat, very similar to Berosus, and analyzed by the Photios Library. It recounts the story of a man, appointed, OES, appointed God, coming out of the Eritrean Sea, including all the body of a fish, but the head, feet, and arms of a man, and who taught astronomy, them letters. Some say he was out of the egg primordial, hence its name, and that he was fully human, but appeared fish, is being covered with a skin of cetacean. Iligen tells in turn, in Fabius, interprets it thus: This is the Babylonian Assyrian god, whose name is phonetically written in cuneiform texts as Anu. Anu, the emphatic state. The transcription of his name in the Semitic character is Uv, for the Bible calls it, which makes a jinn formal jinnu, which informally calls him Anu Malik. The initial articulation being a V, we understand how we could make it in Greek Navar. We'll find later in Fragment 9 the pronunciation of Anu more accurately captured in Soto, and we will come back to it in Note 16 with the same fragment. The god Anu, its role and character. Indeed, the figure of the god, a naked half man and half fish, is consistent with the descriptions of Berosus, which were encountered in the reliefs of the Assyrian palaces and monuments at Nineveh. In the Babylonian cylinders, the cult of Mithras, and the manuscripts at Tutui. Before discussing the origin story of the world that Berosus gave as revealed by Oannes, important to penetrate the spirit and the meaning of this cosmogony, showing an overview of the religious system that presided over the Chaldeo-Assyrian civilization, and may be regarded as the generator of all religions of Syria and Phoenicia. This is a very new subject and still full of obscurities, but on which study figurative monuments of Babylon and Nineveh, together with that text, starts to provide some solid concepts and the principal characteristics, which are now outlined with some safety. One could see an important essay of Sir H. Rawlinson in Book 4 of the English translation of Herodotus, of Hero Endowed by George Rawlinson. The Five Great Monarchies of Ancient Eastern World, 3rd edition. The religion of Assyria and Babylon was in his essential principles and the general spirit that guided his designs, a religion of the same nature as that of Egypt, and in general all the religions of paganism. When it penetrated beyond the outer bark course of polytheism, she was clothed in popular superstitions, and we reached to conceptions of a higher order which had been the starting point, and there found the fundamental concept of divine unity, the last remains of the primitive revelation, but now disfigured by monstrous dreams of pantheism, which confuses the creature within the Creator, and transforms in the divine God-world. All phenomena of nature are manifestations. Below this one supreme God, being the great All in which all things merge and absorb, are staggered in an order of emanation corresponding in order of importance, a peoples of secondary gods, who are none other than its attributes and manifested personifications. It is in these divine personages, and in their reciprocal nature, that is the especial differences between the various religions of the pagans, and the first principle is always the same. The imagination of the Egyptians was particularly struck by successive vicissitudes of racing and red daily annual of the sun. There had been seen the most impressive manifestation of divinity, which revealed better the laws of the world order, and gave the cliques to their divine personifications. The Chaldeo-Assyrians, the milk indulged in a special way to the astronomical crumb, and read from the entire sidereal system, and especially the planetary revelation of the divine being. They considered the stars as his real external events, and they made in their religious system 1. The visible appearance of the divine hypostasis emanating from the substance to be absolute. They identified with the world, his work, our main materials on the scale of emanations and hierarchy of the great gods of the pantheon of Babylon and Assyria. Consist first in a precious tablet at the British Museum, where the names of these gods are related with numbers corresponding to their degree of importance, under a speculation on the value, their mysterious numbers that we do not understand, not in a perfect way. This tablet has not been published up till now, but she was the subject of capital memory hinks in the Transaction of the Royal Irish Academy, volume 23, page 405. Then come the great invocations placed at the head of De Tuclacli Pal il Emer Prism, the moment of no light, and obelisk of Simanu of Assir, number 4, which must be added to the mythological shelves of the library of Nineveh. Another document of paramount importance is also on a tablet of the largest dimension from those in the same library, on a scryal unknown, copied without methodical order the content of a series of tablets, small and very old date, dealing with very varied subjects. Among them, whose transcriptions occupies from line 26 to line 40 of the first column of the front, was originally erect, said a clause terminates by order of Iryukin. We had already the opportunity to speak several times. It contains a list, the greatest gods classified in their hierarchy. Next to each name is an astrological epithet, and these are mysterious. These are expressed by nearly all ideograms, and we seek in vain in these texts. And the who's who from the Aishur-Bonnable times were obscure enough that the scribe author of the copy has believed it necessary to accompany each with an explanatory gloss in small letters. Often as little understanding is possible for us, especially since in most cases this gloss contains the phonetic reading of the epithet in the Akkadian language. The supreme god, the first and only principle from which we derive all the other gods, was Ilu, whose name means God par excellence. Its design was too comprehensive, too wide to receive a form, and therefore worshippers notions of normal people. In this view, the Greeks we had found an analogy with their Kronos, which they assimilated. Chaldeans, it does not appear that any temple he was especially dedicated, although his name had to Babyloni Bab-Ilu, but in Assyria he received the only national designation of Il-Sur, where that came from the land, Mal-Ar, and Panit derivative itself, the Aryan name of the deity, Antra. Voi artest on a mathematical paper Chaldean. As such, he was the great god of the country, the special protector of the Assyrians, one that gave victory to their arms. The enrollment nations describe him as a king or chief of the gods, supreme lord, father of the gods. It is he that must be recognized in representation that Pi-Isis borrowed more later the residents of the Euphrates and Tigris to figure their Ahura Mazda representation, consisting of a bust human wearing the royal tiara, leaving a raised circle and two great eagle wings open in the tail of the same animal. And sometimes to shorten the figure, especially on cylinders, the human bust is omitted. All variants in the Lajard and the cult of Mithra. Besides, if he was worshipped throughout Assyria, and its name constantly deat previous invocations and are addressed to another god, there was no more owned sanctuary in the city of Al-Assur. The Iliok Bible today, Kala Skerbergat, Voi 2, of Rawlinson, attached an essay, Authority 1 English Herodotus, page 588, is usually without companion, although it has under the paternity of the three gods who follow immediately in hierarchical order, and from which descend all other gods. But rare monuments, all belonging to Assyria, to explain this generation, give Ashur a wife, Serwuja, which is only a duplication of himself in his passive form. This is the couple Akchupo and Riakpoi, where Damascus brought out the supreme triad of the Babylonians. In the particular cult Al-Assur city, it seems that Anu was a loincloth Belial to understand. Below, in Ilu, universal and mysterious source, had a triad composed. His first three manifestations were external and visible manifestations, who occupied the summit and puts the scale of the gods in the popular worship. Anuj, the primordial chaos, the first hard emanation, the divine, the demiurge, the organizer of the world. Nizruk, the divine light, the intelligence that permeates the universe, to directs and sustains. This is the great triad. Damascus de Princip, which he calls Avo, and Aoch, phonetically describing names ideographically. The first two, the law god and the lord god, which could in fact, if we took the signs for the syllabic value, on he is sometimes cited from its name from the Greeks, they adored, represent specially to Babylon as Mul-Ita or Moxie, which is the very exact reproduction of his epithet Mulidit generator. A mythological tablets mentions the offense of Babylon. But a name she also frequently provides that a party offense is the name of Tihaudi, the sea, the abyss. It is then the Tori Damascus de Princip, and the Watto of the Berosus fragment. We will return to this, moreover, this appellation of the great goddess of Babylon, in a little further, in the Watto word. We will return to Amal extensively in note 2 to fragment 1, so there is no need to stop it here. As for Davkina, his name is Akkadian, and we do not know if there was a label Assyrian Semitic corresponding. This is clearly composed of the word Davki, synonymous with Dav, meaning lady, and an epithet which may change, because in the mythological logical shelves we read Davki Gal, the grand dame, instead of Davti Na. This is why Damascus made his name by Oxti, leaving aside the Nage or variable qualification. The first Chaldean Assyrian triad represented, as we have seen from the data we have extracted from the monuments on the gods who compose it, the generation of the material world, emanated from the substance, retra divine. First the primordial chaos, the uncreated matter. Following the fundamental principle of all things unique and intelligence, we gladly would call the Word, which animates and makes it fruitful. Finally, the demiurge who orders and made out the organized universe, merging itself with this universe. The series of emanations continued, and then produced one second triad, including the personal medley. Now, abandoning the general and undetermined of those of the first, taking a physiological economy decidedly sidereal, and representing bodily celestial motions determined, those wherein the Chaldeo-Assyrian nothings saw the most exploded outward manifestations. Awnings of divinity, they were Samas, the son of Nisroch, in the moon god, son of Bel, Bin, finally, the god, the atmosphere, the sky, the bright sky, the fixed stars. From Rawlinson's Dissertations. In the digital tablet, after the first triad, the second corresponds to chi fires lower, which gradually continue across descendants, into Dante. In Amai, we expect 10 rather than 6 to the figure of Bin because his downward ratio would continue as more regularly. Besides, it is more reasonable to assume that the scribe wrote 6 by mistake instead of 10, one Bin ideographical names being the 10 god. As for the thirsty god Sin, at an even lower level of emanation were the gods of the 5 planets. We'll talk about the rest a little further from the gods of the second order. This was the theological and theogonic system. The cosmogony itself, as in all religions of antiquity, was of a different form, that of a myth action, but it reproduced the same data a sensate differentiate in this form, and it was inspired by the same principles. And in that of Berossus, we find 2 fundamental dogmas. We have already seen as the origin of all the theogony, the eternality of the material, which is not created but organized by the demiurge. Diarch dogma of Sicily, formerly attributed to the Chaldeans, and the spontaneous generation of living beings from the wet principle. For Babylonians, producing the organized universe was not a creation, but a passage from a being of a determined state, or not being in power, to be in an etra state, determined in a become a word. It must, in fact, use the terms here of Hegelian philosophy, which renewed today the designs of ancient pagan pantheism. The main cosmogony of Sanchoniathon, borrowed from Phoenician sources. And it also begins, well, in the beginning was chaos, bohu, and chaos was dark and troubled, and the suffering, phi, bux, hovered over the chaos. And chaos had not end, and it was so for centuries and centuries. Genesis 1:2 says the earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the face of the deep, and the Spirit God moved upon the waters. News not believed disrespect to the holy books, noting the striking form of analogies and the Babylonian cosmogony. These analogies are such and cover so many details and characteristics that it is impossible not to consider every piece of creation in Genesis, as well as that of the flood, as one of those auto-engine records preserved by oral tradition and inserted into the first book of the Pentateuch, whose existence was ad implementation and demonstrated from the 17th century by a large critical Catholic, Richard Simon, in which, although having said Bossuet, the boldness of exegesis was combined with severe orthodoxy. In our view, these two pieces are an antic, traditional narrative brought by the Chaldeans by Abrahamites in migration that led them to the Chaldean, the country, and the country of Canaan. But if the writer of Genesis admitted the story almost without change in his work, guided by divine inspiration, he gave it a whole new meaning. In that the Chaldean priesthood, an abyss separates indeed the two concepts of Babylonian cosmogony and the cosmogony of the Bible, but the striking similarities in the external form option higher. On the one hand, we have the eternal organic matter, see by a demiurge that emanates from his own breast, or be the universe created, ex nihilo by the omnipotence of God, in a purely spiritual form. To give the old meaning was in the sanctuaries of Chaldea, a meaning almost for the transport of pantheism designed the most material and coarser in the light of the religious authority. All it took was the editor of Genesis together. With time he retained some traits of the narrative, seem at first to contradict his view of creation, as Jehovah Elohim kneading the man with the damp earth in the true demiurge fashion, instead of creating it by his mere word in the manner of the other beings. He enough, we say, the writer of Genesis added to the beginning of everything before painting the chaos, by which we're beginning cosmogony of Chaldea and Phoenicia. The simple verse, "In the beginning God created the heaven and earth." Hence the free act of the spiritual creator is placed before the existence of the chaos. The pagan pantheism thought anterior to all. This chaos, the first principle, the Chaldeans and the gods themselves were out, is a creation that the Lord revealed in time. As said with his philological science, if the unfortunate Abe founded the biblical Ilyar and studies, God starts out of nothing, the first elements of the body. Any other interpretation of the first verse of Genesis is unsustainable. It is not without intention that Moses uses the verb and opposes other verbs used in the rest of the story, with sense, make, shape, form. The first term says something and something more. In the constant use of the language, he marred a divine operation, more radical, more creative than the others. The manuscripts of Scaliger propose to correct the Coptic and the May self. This is ilictor, that the Priest brought the true corrective. It is indeed obviously this is the lesson. Had before me the translation Armenian Tor, which, however, did not understand the sentence, and was embarrassed in his attempts to make it. To express the confusion of the first ones produced in breast chaos, their complex nature in mixing different principles within them. The Babylonian cosmogony uses these symbolic conceptions of beings as taking monstrous forms to different kingdoms of nature, which were dear to the peoples of the geniuses of Asia, and they lavished on it their performances and monuments, and they lavished it on their performances and in their monuments. Greek art in its early days borrowed from the Asian world, and figures like these are very numerous on archaic monuments of the Hellenes, as those of the Etruscans. But the march of progress, purity, taste, and sense of beauty, and the characteristic qualities of the Greek genius, made these monstrous exilic kinds of works of the Hellenics plastic, where they were replaced by the pure anthropomorphism. It's in the comedy they're refound, or they're refigured. It is in the comedy they refigured, and they constituted the religious side. On the release of the Assyrian and Babylonian cylinders, as in monuments throughout Asia anterior and higher, monstrous figures, engendered by a symbolic understanding-ism, often personify the greatest gods, but more consistently applied, as in the account of Berosus, the beings from the world of the darkness and the abyss, whose defeat by the supreme gods and the bright ones is the usual subject represented on the cylinders. It is for this case that artists of the Chaldeo-Assyrian booked the strangest figures, the most unlikely combinations of parts, imprudent to different creatures. The two figures, and in four wings, are extremely multiplied in the monuments of Babylon and Assyrian series. This is one of the attributes by which the more we express usually the activity of the great gods. Nabu, the four wings, and Bata, the Nineveh monument. But the cylinders also offer us figures of four wings of those that are not of gods, and approach therefore more of a description of Berosus. We know in the Babylonian monuments just published at present a very small number of representatives of characteristics coinciding with that set of Berossus here. On the original meaning of these designs, Lenormant, the New Gallery Mythological, see the cone of Persian work rather than Babylonian, where we see a god wearing the tiara with two faces, one male and the other female. Lajarde, the Cult of Venus. Points have yet been found to comply with figures in this description of the Assyrio-Babylonian monuments, but you must compare the curious tale of primitive androgynous as told by Aristophanes in the Bank of Plato. Originally there were three kinds of men, not sex, lament, both that we still see today, male and female, but a third, holding of both, who disappeared and whose name is stuck, indeed existence in name and in reality, the androgyne, the mixture of the male sex and the female sex. While today the same word is used more than an insult, his appearance was human, but willing, round. Today the same word is used, but more as an insult. His appearance was human, but willing, a round back and creepers making circle. He had 4 arm and be much legs, 2 faces exactly, similar to the above a rounded collar, and in the same head 4 ears, the attributes of both sexes and the rest to match. It walked upright, like men, current when he wanted, but when he wanted to run quickly, it used its 8 members to the way acrobats that make the wheel. The mystique of the whole fable said in the mouth of Aristophanes, and the Asian Lenormant, because Plato, Areloplianum, September. As for the fundamental conception of the divine androgen, and its extreme importance in all religions of antiquity, the annals of Insulet Archaeological, and the monograph, and the sacred way of the Eleusinians, we find on a cylinder a winged goat with a human face as the animal that fights the god of light. On another, the same monster is placed in front of a winged sphinx. In the monuments hitherto known, La Figuerde, man on foot and goat horns, the satyr prototype of art, is not observed, however. That of man feet and bull horns is very frequent on the cylinders, where it sometimes applies to beings of worlds of darkness and the abyss, the heavenly and the bright world. One might think that Berossus took here for horse below the lower limbs the members of the bulls often given on the cylinders to genuses, the one the light, others dark, distinct representations, those of which we speak in the previous note, as the head of these figures is not armed with horns. And then again he quotes from the Cult of Mithra, Kalamora, the Oriental Cylinders, number 93, so on and so forth. In a new book, a numismatics book, and an amount of currency money on the Achaemenid kings, on the embroidery of a garment figured in a bas-relief of Assyria, we see a god with 4 wings that combats 2 winged horses, like the Pegasus of the Greeks. Layard, The Monuments of Nineveh, page XLIV number 125. Hippocentaures, the type described here of Berosus, have not yet been seen on the Jinn monuments or directly of the Assyrian or Babylonian, but they figure frequently and rent in the reliefs of any Asian style observed on the black vases of the Etruscans and the printed matter reliefs, or the aid of a cylinder, by a process which should source in Babylon. Mycali, monuments per servire, went Sloria degli Anclepopi. It is also the same type that borrowed to Asia, plexus. The ancient monuments of Greek art give Sennheifers. And then he names another book, Voy, Muller, and Weissler, Denkmal der alten Kunst. Curious comparisons to be made between the centaurs, the son of Gaia, according to some myths, and the giants, which are assigned the same origin, but we cannot here be limited to indicating that view in passing. Let us recall us only that the classical tradition places the Sennheifers in the vestibule of hell, among the powers of the dark underground world. Virgil, the Aeneid, and the horse, which is the half of their nature, were among the Greeks one of the funeral important symbols. Voy, the Netherlands, Shipping and Morea, Scientific Architectural Monuments, page 90-98, extract. To mention that fact, Berosus of Hippocentaurs among the beings of creation primitive, yet the world entirely dedicated to Tenebres, proves that these data had their cradle in the sanctuaries of the bank of the Euphrates. The human head is a bull emblem, as favorites of antiquity represented the Chaldeo-Assyrians. Wing and the head crowned with the tiara that adorned several pairs horns, it is placed at the doors of all the palace Assyria. Bata, Nineveh Monument, Volume 1, page 44 and 45. Page 4. Page 3. It is the divine guardian, as formerly meant, says the prism Asur-A. Alapu, ensuring the Sur Bull, which protects the force of my royalty and the name of my honor. See the listing of Khor Shabad called Fasti. In a low relief of Khor Shabad it appears as a protective spirit. Bata, monument I Sinai. The simple human-headed bull, without wings or tiara, is very common on the cylinders. M. de Saucy, The History of Judaic Art, page 22 through 29, with the archaeological tact so refined and ingenious that the distinguishes sought to establish that the DTIS on the Ark of the Covenant, Exodus 25 XXV 18 at Suive, and the Holy of Holies, Solomon's Temple 1 Regis 6 23 2 Chronologies 3 10 13, were similar winged bulls to those of the door of the Assyrian palace. See the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, page 93. Also the Addendum de Gesenius Thesaurus, page 93. It lends them, in fact, a human face and wings, in comparing Deplis versus 14 ducks, chapter of Ezekiel 10, and the I Provec, that prophet used the word stide with the meaning of tau feis. The question is decided today, in accordance meant to the opinion of the learned academician, by witness Assyrian Scriplius, where we see the bulls of the winged human face alternately designated by the words alapai and kirubai, and where an expression of kirub then extends catacresis by the door itself that flank the symbolic animals. An Aryan origin in the name of the biblical cherubim, comparing them to repuif, placed in India by the Greek legend, as is kirub, a word perfectly Semitic, and that applies very well to beef, like the animal with which we plow. The root of the dictionary Castell. The poetic imagination of the Hebrews represented the cherubim keeping the door of paradise, as the like those of Assyrian palaces, or well serving Jehovah Mount. It should be compared with this description the combinations of several bodies of animals of the same species be combined in one. We offer some engraved stones from the time of Sassanid. The etching performed under the flat of a cone Babylonian offers the image of a winged sphinx, two bodies supporting one single head. The dog-headed horse has not been observed. The dog-headed man lies on one cylinder. The ancient translator was obviously under the eyes of a text where it was different than he read in Cincillus. Versions suggest that the text which he used was Tepa Chua. I know of no example of horse fishtail on public monuments, but the hippocampus is a monstrous type that are passed from Asia into Greece. Hellenic art, even at the time of its greatest perfection, never repudiated, only the mill has reduced it. Frame roll of the gods of the sea, or in the over amount of a man's bust, made one of antiquity's usual tritons. Bouillon, the Antique Museum, Stanza della Via Pinciana monuments. The cylinders offer us examples of other combinations, of the same nature as the fishtail goat Lajarde, called to Mithra, as an undetermined tailed quadruped. Fish. The Armenian translator has understood this very mal passage. There it is, no dragon, but new monsters, mixed forms, such as the cylinders. We still offer many other varieties, which Berossus, or rather its abbreviator, the enumeration stops here. The text that the translator had before Archmenu eyes obviously contains something more here than we had can Cincillus, since he speaks of a fish similar to the sirens. However, the mentioned simple fish seems the real lesson because it fits better with the entire sentence where it is now beings with natural forms. It seems that the Assyrians, who were never a maritime people, have, as the Indians, Brahma picnics, watching the ocean as a remnant of the abyss primordial, still filled with his strange creations monstrous. Indeed, in the reliefs interesting Khorsabad, representing the transport of wood brought by sea for the construction of King Ir-Yukon, we see the waves represented as living beings, all analogous to those that Berossus placed in the world, chaotic, huge reptiles and fish. Many never belong to marine wildlife, snakes, gigantic monsters, and symbolic, such as bull, with human head, just winged bull, figures, fish bodies topped by a bust of a man. All this description of fantastic beings born amidst the chaos is borrowed, we are told. The painters of the temple of Bel of Babylon once spoke in Diodor, which was located in the royal city. We believe that by comparing one side what Berossus says and other monuments of Asian art, or those bear the imprint of his direct influence, we can get to return with enough verisimilitude the avail generalization of the graphic composition to which the author of the Chaldean antiquities meant. The iconic monsters that we just see the enumeration were to form long series by areas super questions, such as real or imaginary animals, decorating the archaic Greek vistas called Oriental style, whose paintings, vases, as noted by Mr. de Longperrier in the Asian Journal, October and November, these are mainly copied etophiles to religious topics, religious and animal figures that make clothes, all the important figures in the release of the Assyrian nothings. The trade brought in Greece primitive and which was made very early in this latter, imitations which we did not change symbolic representations, like the famous Peplus Allisthane of Sybaris, pseudo-Aristotle, from Mirabilis Auscult 99. Thus, a cylinder shows in two overlapping areas meeting the heavenly gods, below the lower monsters and dark world. Also, Cultaor, Oriental cylinders. In addition, and probably before these figures, zones animals was the image of Omoroka, sovereign, and its size should equal the height occupied by the series superimposed monsters. She was probably in front her bell, armed with a sword and ready to defend the two, had even making the movement of the strike. Therefore, on a cylinder we see Bel Marduk opposite Belu Tiabudi or Tihudi. the same as the Omoroka of Berosus, equipped with large wings and holding the harp, the goddess amid the monsters which she chairs, which form behind her three superimposed registers. Another shows the cosmogonic struggle of the demiurge and the goddess of chaos, as told by Berossus, except that the goddess, instead to have a human figure, is symbolized as a lioness. So we see there Bel Marduk standing, armed with the thunder and the sword, which will hit the upright and lioness as great as him. Behind the lioness are four overlapping areas, the first containing various animals and three human heads, the second a goat, a lion, a man knocked down, and an eagle. The third occupied waves of the deep, the lower finally revealing various monstrous beings, including a winged lion and a man kneeling with two heads, one human and the other bull. Both monuments seem directly inspired by the paints and the temple of Both monuments seem directly inspired by the paintings of the Temple of Baal. They give us a certain idea. It is also closer to the description of Berossus' composition to further any Asian aspect of release of a famous Etruscan vase in black earth, where one Perseus armed seized the sword to slay the advancing Gorgon, surrounds a series of no less monsters and hideous. She seems the Queen Mycale Monumenta, Mentiper, that Scaliger wanted to correct wrongly in Apoxa. Uruk, the particular name given to the goddess Belit, on line 52 of column 2 of the registration of Nabu Kuduritzur, known as the Beryl Phillips. The name means mother of city of Uruk, and is more monitoring Belit epithet Uruk, the lady of Uruk. The latter title also reads several times kings of inscriptions of the Old Kingdom. It characterizes a manner very special, Belit under his infernal aspect, chaotic tick and gloomy as Uruk. The Bible, Genesis X 10. Classical geographers was the great burial field of the ancient Chaldeans, the city of death par excellence. Loftus travels in Chaldea. Rawlinson's dissertations. As to the second name given to this goddess, the correction, or to instead of Oaxar, the worn manuscripts, Syncellus and Aarus had the text on which worked the Armenian translator, was proposed for the first time in our ancient history manual, the History of the Manual of the Orient. It's certain she compared with the Tauri Damascus, which is also the Tehudi cuneiform text, and especially the explanation given by Berosus, that Quaxoa, because that word, or Tehudi, Tehumpti, Odri, which became the name of Bel and Belit, considered the abyss primordial, is the word that is used most commonly for the designate sea in the Assyrian language. This last phrase is not in Armenian. This is obviously an addition of Syncellus, made we know from who, but it is out of place, since the Babylonians to the moon was a male god, Sin. The work of the demiurge Bel, organizing the world, is expressed in the cosmogonic legend as a company of a violent takeover of the god, of the Tehudi goddess, who personifies of the Bel Tehudi goddess, who personifies the primordial abyss, the inorganic matter, and fertility count, theogonic in the system. On the contrary, the idea is made by the union of Bel and Belit, where born gods who represent the organized universe. It is this alternation in the equivalence of the two notions of struggle and love, epic and eptic, as the Greeks said, that lies at the bottom of all religious conceptions of antiquity. But the demiurge is derived itself from the abyss of the primordial. But the demiurge is itself derived from the primordial abyss. Bel, presented in a case like the husband of Belit Tehudi, and the other as the fighter to make the world out of Tenel and chaos, may be in a last view considered his son. It's that which is formally stated in the divine genealogy reported by Damascius, the Principus, page 125, where T and Unti, Aureov, that is to say the primordial water, T Hayudi, and the abyss of the word, would be the couple of Aok and Ai, that is to say the Bel Dagon, and a female duplication of person. Thus we are led in the presence of the concept of interplay, of absolute being in his first manifest outdoor festation, generated spontaneously. Concept holds an important place in ancient religions, such as the monograph of the Eleusinian Way, page 1, page 494 and 491. It occurs usually in the form of a struggle, sometimes hostile, often in love, and there arises the conception of the sacred myth, of the incest of the god husband of his mother, one of the ways we express the idea of a god who creates himself. And he quotes again from Mori, The History of Religions of Greece. This design we distinguish, but veiled in reports of Bel Demiurge with Belit Tehiuli, the passion material sieve on which it operates is clearly stated in the local cult of the city of Nippur, where Belit is both mother and wife of the god. We also find it in the legend, any mythological incest of Semiramis with her son Ninyas, Justinians 1 and 2. The cosmological narrative Berosus being that of Babylon itself, we must not hesitate to admit that the god who plays the role of Demiurge Bel is essentially in its local form of Bel Marduk, and indeed it's a special tutelary god of the city of Babylon, and is very frequently represented on the armed cylinders of the sword, with which he cut into or Uruk Belit Tihayuli. One of them has a no sword and an axe in his hand, but he cannot interfere to defend against thieves. In stable shoes placed at the top of the pyramid in the royal city. He was otherwise represented from what we Diodorus as a man standing and walking, the second type images of Bel Marduk, who then holds a short scepter in hand, not least that multiplied the first on cylinders. Cullimore, Oriental cylinders, 33, 45, 75, 99, 101, it goes on and on and on. Baruch 6:1 March will also alludes a one door, a scepter as the judge of a province, and it does not put to death one who sins against him. We have seen Supranote 6 the title judge is precisely one of those who belong to Bel Marduk. I kept in the text at that point the punctuation generally adopted, which is the cleavage of sentences as it had been before the eyes of the author in the Armenian version, but I translated it into French, and I think that it must be the original and primitive lesson. And today, indeed, there had to be an explanation of allegory, and this gives us a perfectly clear statement of the doctrine of spontaneous generation, wet, which is the basis of all this cosmogony. With punctuation, the phrase on moisture, primordial, not connects that very awkward to what is said of Bel, and is not called by the direction of the rest. A reciprocal this passage representation, a cylinder in which a cut head is placed at the feet of Bel Marduk, holding the scepter. Jehovah Elohim formed man of the dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. The Greeks also represent in their legends Prometheus, playing the role of a demiurge or secondary creator, shaping with clay the first individuals of our species. And he quotes from Apollodor, Ovid, Melum, Etymol. Besides this, the ideal man was formed beyond earth. One of the most ancient remains of the primitive tradition is found among the peoples diverse. Our manual Ancient History of the Orient, the assimilation of Bel and special Bel Marduk of Babylon to the Greek Zeus. We research, and it's already made by Herodotus. And God said, "Let there be light." And the lurst was. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from darkness. God also says, "What is the firmament in the midst of water? And it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from those above. And it was so. God said, Let the waters below the sky come together in one place, and let the earth appear. And it was so." The demiurge does not destroy the world of darkness and chaos. It divides and mated out the organized universe. But Tenel world continues to exist with its Ruck's evil spirits, his strange and monstrous creations. The astrological system exposed by Diodorus assigns to them as domain the entire lower half of the universe and the celestial sphere. From this follows the doctrine of spirits of darkness and evil, and its influence on which is based magic. And we reviendrons at the end of the note 46. Similarly, the demiurge had defeat and hit the goddess, who personifies the abyss, to organize the creation. Even the gods are bright, forced to fight, and constantly beat children. Monster of the abyss and darkness, and this incessant struggle, sufficiently renewed, is what keeps the universe. Also, is most often traced in the representations of the religious cylinders, where we see successively the gods take part. But for those who get to the bottom of things, there, as in all religions antique, combat is only apparent, and the two adversaries resolve in the pantheistic unity of the first principle. The story of the formation of man has done us see the energy personified in the demiurge of the lower gods around him and carry out his orders, playing the role of second creators. Here is the blood of one of these gods, kneaded with the earth, gives life to animals, while it is the blood that serves Bel to form man. The mention of the men present text as we have done, duplicating what above, and is justified in any way to this place. So we believe we must restore, from the story as we us restore. It seems resultant that the Babylonian cosmogony was born, man before the animals. In the Bible, the contrary, the creation of man is the last as the most perfect made, and just put the seal to the work of God. The biblical account also defers creation of the sun, the moon, and the stars of the separation of light and darkness. And the very fact later, has God said, Let there be luminaries in the firmament of the heaven, to divide the day and the night, and they for signs and for seasons, and seasons, days, and years. Let them shine in the firmament of heaven to give light earth. And it was so. God made two great luminaries, one great to rule the day, the lesser to rule at night, and he made the stars also. The latest creations from Bel match two main groups of gods, the Chaldean theogony and the Assyrian theogony. Up immediately below the supreme triad, the group of the three major gods of the universe organized, and to the group of the gods of the 5 planets, less. What personages with the first triad and Ilu complete the cycle of 12 gods that Diodorus called the modern Zupiat, the second triad. The Selides, the gods who preside al ensemble of the organized universe, consists, as we have already said above, in note 16 of the Bin and Amos. Bin is the god of the atmosphere, the sky, the bright sky, the fixed stars. His main titles are the Minister of Heaven and Earth, the Distributor of Abundance, Soiniel, Lord of the Channels, in which any resident fertility from the country, bountiful leader, the god of fertility. In the accompanying essay in the volume of English Herodotus, it is also, as it belongs, due to the god of the atmosphere, the lord of the storm, Tourbillon, the spammer. They say of kings, conquerors, they had devastating enemy countries like Bin Whirlwind, and called this god, he who sweeps its storm rebels in enemy countries. His attribute, common purpose, and characteristic of the monuments of art is the lightning. In an Assyrian bas-relief we see Porter, the midst of a procession, the statue, reinforced front 4 horns, standing, holding the axe and the lightning. In another, transported in London, it has 4 large wings, dressed in king coif tiara, with several pairs of superimposed horns, and he continued his lightning genius of darkness, represented in the guise of a horrible monster. Quoted again in Layard, Monuments of Nineveh, new series, page 5, with parts, we frequently find the figure of Bin holding the support and standing on a bull. Elsewhere he is standing on a lion. A cylinder the feet shows holding the axe and the lightning. On another, withering enemies headlong. It is also sometimes symbolized by the lightning covered a bull, or only the lightning. This is the title of the god of thunder. R. This is the title of the god of thunder, the celestial fire. The ideographic expression on his behalf is sometimes used in cuneiform text with the meaning of fire. The same fiery nature was symbolized with the red color which was clothed exteriorly in the ancient temple of the god in the Vilayat-Yil, Assyria, rebuilt by Tukladi-Pal-Asar, a line that appears to reveal the bit name Amir, the Red Temple, given to the publisher of office and the sacred king of the prism of the Assyrian who raised him, a completely different way of representing the emblematic of Bin with respect to its firmament of God nature and brightness. On a curious cylinder we see symbols, 3 gods, grouped at hand, placed on altars. Ea Mas and Sin are represented by 2 beetles, overcoming the emblems of the sun and the moon. On the place of Bin, it is occupied by the image of a dog, symbol of Lurst in Chaldeo-Assyrians. What we said, that representation in the reports of the Academy of Inscriptions in Bell's letters. The dog's meeting, the sun and the moon, representing the second triad of Babylon and Assyria, is found on another cylinder. The character drifting in cuneiform, the primitive figure of the dog, and the meaning of the ideographic light, is phonetically ur, bed, because of the word means light in all the Semitic languages. Brr. We would find that all simple syllable values are related to reading the same signs as ideograms taken in the Akkadian language. When word of this reading was a monosyllable, it was taken simply as a phonetic value. When it consisted of several syllabary labes, The phonetic value is that of the first, according acrologically to the method implemented in the passage of the early records of the ideogram and the phonetic. This is from voyages of introducing our memory on the spread of the Phoenician alphabet. The syllables of compound values have the same origin. A sign represents a syllable, and the idea of is about the descriptions of those peoples and some of the oldest descriptions that we have of recorded writings on Earth. So here we go. We're going to get into it here. So again, we have to remember the extremely old text that has been translated, then retranslated. So it's translated from ancient Akkadian and Babylonian cylinder seals and translated into German or into Latin and then back into French for Lenormand himself. Forgive me if as I piece it together, it might be a bit choppy, and I'll try and get the whole thing put together into one sensible piece. But from what I've read from it already, it doesn't take too much to see what they're saying and the import of what they're saying there. So I've already gone through the first 50 pages, and what they're talking about is different created words that are important to the biblical texts. One here being fish and the yal syllable, because fish thought yal was finish. Similarly, the ideogram, which means good, is the phonetic sign of the yi syllable because the word for good was Akkadian yigu. These examples sufficient, we could multiply indefinitely, taking up but one by one the signs of the cuneiform syllabary. Okay, welcome back. So this is Cosmogonies by Berosus and by Lenormand, in their own words. This will be again about our cosmogony and the origins of humanity in reference to whether or not the biblical history of Genesis is correct, where it came from, and also it's in reference to the Chaldeans, and you'll see about it, he'll get into that, but also about the northern peoples that originally gave civilization to humanity and to Egypt and to many of the Akkadian and Assyrio-Babylonian societies, as well as also the Vedics in India and the other cosmogonies that we know as the major flat earth cosmogonies. And so this is sun, the Akkadian word for sun being tur or Tur. Another, the Gaian syllable, the idea of saying the Akkadian mistletoe or gula for great. A third has the meaning of country and painted the syllable composed mat, according to the Akkadian word mata, country. So that's an interesting portion because Matarik is a word that Zen has been looking into, and mata is apparently the Akkadian word for country. So he's going to explain here that Akkadian is the same thing as Chaldean, is the same thing as Babylonian. and you'll see shortly why. But the Turanian of La Chaldee, or the Turanian of the Chaldeans, they invented this system of writing on the banks of the Tigris, at the bottom of the Euphrates, or they brought it from another region. Where would it have been made before the final migration? It is conceivable that this is a question that would be foolhardy in trying to answer in the present state of science. However, when studies die, the constituent signs of cuneiform writing, in essay form, go back to the images of the physical objects that the signs originally represented. Naturally, these objects seem to lead, as the origin of writing, to another region of the Chaldeans at a septentrional region, whose flora and fauna were notably different, where, for example, neither the lion nor any major feline species of carnivores were known, and where the palm tree did not exist.